I spent 30 years bleeding my soul dry to raise a child I thought was an orphan nephew, only to discover on my deathbed he was my husband's bastard. Now, I'm 16 again. The first thing I did? Tore up my Oak Ridge High acceptance letter. Let them rot. The sterile, suffocating scent of hospital bleach still clung to the back of Chloe's throat when her eyes snapped open. For a terrifying second, she expected to see the flatlining monitor, the harsh fluorescent lights, and the mocking faces of the three people who had drained her life away. She expected to hear the cold, cruel voice of Leo, the boy she had raised as her own son for 3 decades, sneering, "Thanks for the inheritance, Mom. But my real mother wants her house back." She expected to see Arthur, her husband of 31 years, standing beside her hospital bed, his arm wrapped tightly around the waist of Daphne Croft, the woman Chloe had graciously allowed to live in their estate's guest house because she was supposedly a destitute family friend. Instead, Chloe saw the pale pink canopy of her childhood bed. She shot up, her chest heaving, her hands instinctively clutching at her own skin. It was smooth. The frail, needle-bruised hands of a dying 50-year-old woman were gone, replaced by the unblemished skin of her youth. Her heart, which had just given out from decades of stress, betrayal, and chronic illness, was beating with the fierce, steady rhythm of a teenager. She scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the plush Persian rug, and stared into the gilded mirror above her vanity. Staring back at her was a 16-year-old girl with sharp, intelligent green eyes and cascading auburn hair. The date on her desk calendar read August 14th. The year was exactly 34 years in the past. It was the morning her acceptance letter to Oak Ridge High School was supposed to arrive. A dark, glacial rage settled into Chloe's bones. In her previous life, she had gone to Oak Ridge. She had been the sweet, naive heiress to the Harrington shipping empire. She had met Arthur Pendleton, the handsome, charismatic captain of the debate team. She had fallen for his meticulously crafted sob story about a teenage mistake, a tragic accident, and an orphaned baby nephew named Leo, who had no one else in the world. Chloe, bursting with empathy and blinded by love, had married Arthur at 19. She took in Leo, raising him with endless devotion, pouring millions into his education, his health, his every whim. She had even welcomed Daphne, the supposed grieving aunt, offering her a job, a home, and endless financial support. 30 years of lies. 30 years of raising another woman's child while they laughed at her behind her back, siphoning the Harrington fortune until Chloe was left broken, sick, and entirely alone. Not this time. Chloe walked downstairs, her steps deliberate and eerily silent. In the grand dining room, her mother Beatrice was sipping Earl Grey tea, while her father Richard Harrington was deeply engrossed in the morning financial papers. In the center of the mahogany table sat a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the prestigious Oak Ridge High crest. "Ah, Chloe, darling," Beatrice smiled, her eyes crinkling. "Your acceptance letter arrived. I was just telling your father we should host a dinner to celebrate. The Pendleton's boy, Arthur, is starting there as well. It would be good for you two to connect. His father is a close associate of ours." Chloe picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. Instead, she gripped it with both hands and tore it cleanly in half. Beatrice gasped, nearly dropping her teacup. Richard lowered his newspaper, his thick eyebrows furrowing in shock. "Chloe, what on earth are you doing?" "I'm not going to Oak Ridge," Chloe said, her voice completely devoid of the teenage petulance her parents might have expected. It was the calm, authoritative tone of a matriarch who had survived a war. "I want to attend St. Bartholomew's Preparatory." "St. Bart's?" Richard frowned, bewildered. "Chloe, that's on the other side of the city. It's an incredibly rigorous environment, mostly for the children of foreign diplomats and tech moguls. Oak Ridge is where our social circle goes. It's where Arthur—" "I don't care about Arthur Pendleton, Dad," Chloe interrupted, dropping the torn pieces of the letter into the trash bin beside the sideboard. "Oak Ridge is a country club, pretending to be an educational institution. If I am going to eventually take over Harrington shipping, I need to be surrounded by sharks, not trust fund babies resting on their grandfather's laurels. I want St. Bart's, and I want you to pull your pending investments from Pendleton Logistics." The dining room fell into a stunned silence. Richard stared at his daughter, his jaw slightly slack. He had never discussed the pending Pendleton investment with her. He had never discussed business with her at all. She had always been more interested in literature and riding horses. "How do you know about Pendleton Logistics?" Richard asked, his voice dropping to a serious, calculating whisper. "I know that they are over-leveraged," Chloe lied smoothly, utilizing the devastating financial knowledge she had uncovered during her agonizing divorce proceedings 30 years in the future. "I know they have a massive deficit in their European supply chain that they are hiding from you, and they are relying on our capital to plug a sinking ship. Look into their offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Dad. Specifically under the shell company Crescent Holdings." Richard's face drained of color. The specifics she was naming were highly classified, and if true, absolutely catastrophic. He stood up slowly, abandoning his breakfast. "I need to make a phone call." As her father hurried to his study, Beatrice stared at Chloe as if looking at a stranger. "Chloe, what has gotten into you?" Chloe offered her mother a small, genuine smile, the first one of her new life. "I just woke up, Mom. That's all." By avoiding Oak Ridge, Chloe wasn't just changing her school. She was completely severing the timeline. Without her proximity, Arthur would have no wealthy heiress to charm. Without her family's money, Arthur wouldn't be able to cover up the fact that he had gotten Daphne Croft pregnant over the summer. Let them deal with their own mess. She had an empire to build. The halls of St. Bartholomew's Preparatory were nothing like the relaxed, ivy-covered courtyards of Oak Ridge. Here the air crackled with ambition.
The students wore sharp, navy blue blazers, and their conversations were less about weekend parties and more about venture capital, early admissions to Oxford, and international tech patents.
Chloe thrived instantly. Freed from the emotional parasite of Arthur and the exhausting demands of raising his illegitimate child, her mind was razor sharp. She quickly caught the attention of Gabriel Hayes. Gabriel was the heir to the Hayes aviation empire, a quiet, intensely observant boy with messy dark hair and eyes like chipped flint. He wasn't the captain of the football team, nor did he care to be. He spent his time in the library analyzing stock trends and reading Machiavelli in the original Italian. In her past life, Chloe only knew of Gabriel from the Forbes lists. He had become a reclusive billionaire while her own family's wealth had been slowly bled dry by the Pendletons. Their first interaction happened in a senior economics seminar, a class Chloe had tested into despite being a sophomore. The fundamental flaw in corporate mergers, Gabriel was drawling from the back row, leaning his chair precariously on two legs, is the assumption of transparency. Companies will obscure their liabilities until the ink is dry, leaving the acquiring party holding the bag. "Which is why due diligence must extend beyond the provided ledgers," Chloe chimed in, not looking up from her notes. "You don't look at what a company is showing you. You look at what they are desperately trying to distract you from. Panic is expensive, and it always leaves a paper trail." Gabriel let his chair drop forward with a sharp thud. He stared at her, an amused, predatory smile curving his lips. "Well said, Harrington." From that day on, an unspoken alliance formed. They were drawn to each other's relentless drive. Gabriel recognized something hardened and ancient in Chloe's eyes, a ruthlessness that didn't belong to a 16-year-old girl. He didn't ask questions, but he made it his business to stay close. Meanwhile, across the city, the butterfly effect of Chloe's absence was tearing Arthur Pendleton's life apart. Without Richard Harrington's massive capital injection, which had been swiftly canceled after Richard's investigators confirmed Chloe's tip about the Cayman's Pendleton logistics plummeted into a financial crisis. The Pendletons went from being high society royalty to pariahs in a matter of weeks. Worse, Arthur's meticulously constructed facade was cracking. In the original timeline, Arthur had used his newfound relationship with the wealthy Chloe Harrington to distract his parents and the school from the truth. 16-year-old Daphne Croft, a girl from the poorer side of town, was pregnant with his child. Back then, Chloe had been the perfect shield. Arthur had convinced Chloe that Daphne was a tragically widowed cousin, manipulating Chloe's golden heart into paying for Daphne's medical care, housing, and eventually the child's upbringing. Now, Arthur was broke, desperate, and entirely exposed. Rumors were already spreading at Oak Ridge about Daphne's expanding waistline and Arthur's frantic, secretive arguments with her in the school parking lot. The two worlds violently collided in December at the annual Tri-State Winter Debate Gala. It was a black-tie event hosted at a grand hotel downtown, attended by the elite from St. Bart's, Oak Ridge, and several other private academies. Chloe arrived wearing a stunning emerald green evening gown that complemented her auburn hair, looking every inch the untouchable heiress. Gabriel Hayes walked beside her, impeccably dressed in a tailored tuxedo, his presence alone parting the crowds. It didn't take long for the vultures to circle. Chloe was standing by the champagne tower when she heard the sickeningly familiar voice. "Chloe? Chloe Harrington?" She turned slowly. Arthur Pendleton stood there. Even at 16, he possessed the arrogant, polished good looks that had once ruined her life. But now, without the backing of his father's wealth, his tuxedo looked a little worn, and there was a desperate, hungry gleam in his eyes. He had been looking for a lifeline, and he clearly thought the Harrington heiress was his ticket out of ruin. "Arthur," Chloe said, her voice perfectly polite, perfectly freezing. "I don't believe we've formally met." Arthur flashed his signature, dimpled smile, the one that had once made her teenage heart skip a beat. Tonight, it just made her want to sanitize her hands. "We haven't, but I've heard so much about you. My father speaks very highly of yours. It's a tragedy you didn't attend Oak Ridge. We would have been in the same classes." "I prefer an environment where the student body relies on intellect rather than nepotism," Chloe replied, taking a slow sip of her sparkling cider. Arthur's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Ouch!" A sharp tongue. "I like that. Actually, I was hoping I could steal you away for a dance. There are some charitable ventures my family is working on, and someone with your obvious grace and empathy would be a perfect fit." Chloe looked past him. Lingering near the entrance of the ballroom, looking pale, terrified, and visibly pregnant in a poorly fitting dress, was Daphne Croft. She was staring at Arthur with tear-filled eyes, watching him try to seduce his way out of his responsibilities. The audacity of it made Chloe's blood hum with dark satisfaction. He was running the exact same play, just without the safety net. "A charitable venture?" Chloe echoed, her voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of the surrounding elite, including Gabriel, who had stepped up behind her. "Is that what we're calling teenage pregnancy these days, Arthur?" The surrounding chatter died instantly. Arthur went rigid, his face draining of all color. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his polished facade shattering into a million pieces. "Oh, please. Half of the city knows your father's company is drowning in debt due to embezzlement, and the other half knows you've left a 16-year-old girl pregnant and crying by the coat check," Chloe said, her voice ringing out clear and unforgiving in the sudden silence. "Don't mistake my wealth for stupidity, Arthur. If you want a charity case, look in the mirror." Arthur opened his mouth, his face flushing a furious, violent red. But before he could step toward her, Gabriel materialized at Chloe's shoulder. Gabriel didn't say a word. He simply leveled a cold, dead-eyed stare at Arthur, radiating the kind of silent, old-money power that money could no longer buy the Pendletons. Arthur backed away, humiliated, turning to flee the ballroom as whispers erupted like wildfire around him. He brushed past a sobbing Daphne without even looking at her. Gabriel looked down at Chloe, a smirk playing on his lips. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, Harrington." "Just don't lie to me, Hayes," Chloe said, her eyes locked on the exit where her past had just run out the door. "And we'll get along just fine." She had destroyed his safety net, exposed his lies, and severed the chains of her past life. But as she watched Daphne being escorted out by hotel security, Chloe knew the war wasn't over. Arthur was a cornered rat, and rats always bite back. Let him try. She had 30 years of suppressed rage to unleash, and she was just getting started. The look on Arthur's face that night at the gala was a masterpiece I replayed in my mind for weeks. But as satisfying as it was to publicly shatter his pristine facade, I knew a wounded animal was the most dangerous kind. I had lived with Arthur Pendleton for 31 years in my previous life. I knew the grotesque depths of his narcissism.
He didn't see himself as a villain. He saw himself as a victim of circumstance, entitled to the world's wealth by any means necessary.
And right now, I was the wealth he felt entitled to. By March, the Pendleton empire was officially in ruins. The tip I had given my father led to an FBI investigation into Pendleton logistics. Arthur's father, Thomas Pendleton, was indicted on 47 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The sprawling Pendleton estate in the Hamptons was seized. Their luxury cars were auctioned off. Arthur, the former golden boy of Oak Ridge High, was suddenly a pariah, wearing last season's suits, living in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood he used to mock. I, on the other hand, was thriving. At St. Bartholomew's, Gabriel Hayes and I had become an inseparable force. We weren't just passing high school classes. We were actively shadowing our father's board meetings, quietly laying the groundwork for a future merger between Harrington Shipping and Hayes Aviation. Gabriel was brilliant, cynical, and ruthlessly protective of our partnership. He never asked why I possessed the financial foresight of a Wall Street veteran, and I never told him. He simply trusted the results. But the peace couldn't last. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when my private investigator, Michael Briggs, a former NYPD detective I had hired using my trust fund, slid a manila folder across the table of a quiet downtown diner. "You were right, Miss Harrington," Briggs grunted, taking a sip of his black coffee. "Your boy Arthur is getting desperate, and he's getting sloppy." I opened the folder. Inside were grainy photographs of Arthur meeting with two rough-looking men in the alleyway behind a dive bar. "Who are they?" I asked, my blood running cold as a sickeningly familiar memory surfaced. "Local muscle. Guys with rap sheets for extortion and aggravated assault," Briggs explained. "Word on the street is that Arthur hired them to stage a mugging. The target is you. The plan is for these goons to corner you after your violin lesson on Thursday. Arthur is going to miraculously appear, fight them off, and save your life. He's hoping to play the hero, trauma bond with you, and get back into the Harrington family's good graces." I closed my eyes, a wave of profound nausea washing over me. He ran this exact same play. In my past life, I had been cornered in a parking garage by two men. I had been terrified, weeping, thinking I was going to die. Then Arthur had appeared out of nowhere, taking a brutal beating to protect me. I had visited him in the hospital every day. I had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with my savior. I had married him a year later.
He staged it. The realization was a physical blow. 30 years of devotion, built on a violently orchestrated lie.
"Miss Harrington?" Briggs asked, looking concerned. "Do you want me to go to the police? We can have him picked up for conspiracy." I opened my eyes, the nausea replaced by a rage so absolute, so crystalline, it felt like ice in my veins. "No," I said softly. "The police will just give him a slap on the wrist. He's a minor with no prior record. I want to ruin him. Completely." I formulated a plan, one that required Gabriel's help. When I told Gabriel what Arthur was planning, I saw a terrifying darkness flash in his chipped flint eyes. He didn't express shock or pity. He went straight into tactical mode. Thursday evening arrived, shrouded in a heavy, freezing downpour. I walked out of the conservatory after my violin lesson, clutching my case, intentionally taking the dimly lit shortcut through the alleyway toward the main street. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from anticipation. Right on cue, two large figures stepped out from behind a dumpster, blocking my path. "Hey there, rich girl," one of them sneered, brandishing a switchblade. "Hand over the purse and the jewelry." I feigned a gasp, stepping back. "Please, just take it," I whimpered, letting my violin case slip to the wet pavement. "Leave her alone." The heroic shout echoed from the entrance of the alley. Arthur came sprinting through the rain, his jaw set in a mask of determined bravery. He charged the two men, throwing a wildly exaggerated punch. But instead of the choreographed scuffle Arthur had paid for, The alley was suddenly flooded with blinding high-beam headlights. 2 black SUVs blocked the exits. The doors flew open, and half a dozen massive, heavily armed private security contractors, Gabriel's father's elite detail, swarmed the alley. The 2 hired thugs dropped their knives instantly, throwing their hands in the air, terrified out of their minds. Arthur froze, his fist still raised, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. Gabriel stepped out of the lead SUV, holding an umbrella over his head, his expression utterly bored. He walked up to the thugs. "I assume the Pendleton boy promised you a few thousand for this pathetic piece of theater?" Gabriel asked smoothly. One of the thugs swallowed hard. "Yeah, $5,000 each. He said he just wanted to look tough for the girl." Arthur's face crumpled in horror. "No! Chloe, they're lying! They were going to hurt you." I stepped out from the shadows of the alley, my demeanor completely changing from a terrified teenager to a cold, untouchable judge. I walked right up to Arthur. He was soaked, shivering, and looking at me with wide, panicked eyes. "You really lack imagination, Arthur," I whispered, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Did you really think I wouldn't see you coming? Did you think you could buy my affection with a cheap parlor trick while your father is rotting in a federal holding cell?" "Chloe, please," Arthur reached for me. Before his fingers could graze my coat, Gabriel grabbed Arthur's wrist, twisting it just enough to make Arthur gasp in pain. "Touch her," Gabriel said, his voice a low, lethal hum, "and I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life eating out of a feeding tube. Do we understand each other?" Arthur nodded frantically, tears of humiliation mixing with the rain on his cheeks. I looked at the security team. "Hand the 2 thugs over to the police. Let them confess to the staged assault and extortion. Make sure Arthur's name is all over their statements." As we walked away, leaving Arthur on his knees in the wet alley, the last thread of power he held over me snapped. He wasn't a master manipulator. He was just a pathetic, greedy boy, and I was finally free. 3 months later, the scandal of the staged assault hit the local papers. Because Arthur was a minor, his name was officially withheld, but in our circles everyone knew. He was expelled from Oak Ridge. He was facing juvenile probation. He was entirely broken. But my past wasn't quite finished with me. It was late May, the air thick with the promise of summer, when I received a frantic phone call from the front gate of the St. Bartholomew's campus. "Miss Harrington, there is a young woman here to see you. She's highly distressed. Says her name is Daphne Croft." A chill ran down my spine. Daphne. The woman who had lived in my guest house for 30 years, drinking my wine, spending my money, and laughing at me behind my back while I raised her son. "Send her to the courtyard," I instructed. I walked out to the manicured gardens, Gabriel trailing silently a few paces behind me. Daphne was sitting on a stone bench, looking completely haggard. She was heavily pregnant, days away from giving birth to Leo, the boy I had spent a lifetime mothering, the boy who had ultimately spit on my deathbed. When she saw me, Daphne burst into tears. "Chloe, please, you have to help me." I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms. "Why on earth would I help you, Daphne?" "Arthur left me," she sobbed, clutching her swollen belly. "When his family lost their money, he stopped taking my calls. When he got arrested for that alley thing, he blamed me. He said if I hadn't gotten pregnant, he wouldn't have been so desperate. Now I have nothing. My parents kicked me out. I have nowhere to go. I heard you were kind. Please, just some money for the baby." For a split second, the ghost of my past self, the naive, bleeding heart girl, felt a twinge of pity. But then I remembered the smirk on Daphne's face 30 years in the future, as she stood by my dying body, holding Arthur's hand. "Thanks for keeping my seat warm, Chloe," she had whispered to me then. The pity evaporated, replaced by cold, hard justice. "You think I'm kind?" I asked, laughing softly. "Let me tell you what I think, Daphne. I think you and Arthur thought you were terribly clever. I think you planned to use this baby to trap a wealthy family. If Arthur had kept his money, you would be living in a mansion right now. But the money is gone, and so is the illusion." Daphne stared at me, her tears stopping as a flash of genuine, calculating panic crossed her eyes. She wasn't just a victim. She had always been complicit. I am not your savior, I continued, my voice steady, and I will not raise your child for you. But I am not a monster. I have set up a modest trust fund at a bank in Seattle. It will pay for a small apartment and basic living expenses for you and the child for exactly 5 years. After that, you are on your own. Daphne's jaw dropped. Seattle? But that's across the country. I don't know anyone there. Exactly, I said, leaning in slightly. You are going to take this money, you are going to get on a plane, and you are never going to step foot in this state again. You are never going to contact Arthur, and you are never going to look in my direction. If you refuse, or if you ever return, I will use every ounce of the Harrington fortune to ensure social services takes that baby from you the second it is born, citing your lack of income and association with a convicted felon. Daphne recoiled as if I had struck her. She looked into my eyes and saw absolutely zero mercy. She knew I wasn't bluffing. Okay, she whispered, her voice trembling. Okay, I'll go. Good. I handed her an envelope containing the flight details and the bank information. Have a nice life, Daphne. As she waddled away, carrying the unborn child who had once been my entire world, I felt a strange, profound sense of grief mixed with overwhelming relief. I was mourning the son I thought I had, but I was finally free of the parasite he truly was. That was brutal, Gabriel remarked, stepping up beside me and watching Daphne leave. That was mercy, I corrected him, turning to face the sprawling, ivy-covered walls of my future. More mercy than they ever would have shown me. Gabriel smiled, a genuine, rare expression that softened the hard edges of his face. He offered me his arm. Come on, Harrington, we have a board meeting to prep for. And I think it's time we start discussing that merger. I took his arm, the ghosts of my past finally silent, fading away into the ether. I wasn't the tragic, betrayed wife anymore. I was Chloe Harrington. And this time, I was going to own the world. 30 years of my past life were stolen by lies, but being reborn gave me the ultimate weapon, the truth. I didn't just escape my tragic fate. I dismantled the people who tried to ruin me and built an empire from their ashes. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply rewriting your own destiny.